I'm Christopher Horrocks, and this is Virtual Intelligence, a series about what happens when machines speak more fluently than they understand, machines that don't know right from wrong and true from false. This is Virtual Intelligence and the Kill Chain. On March 12, 2026, Palantir Technologies held its 9th annual AIPCON conference. Cameron Stanley, the Department of Defense's Chief Digital and AI Officer, stood on stage and described how the Maven Smart System had consolidated 8 or 9 separate targeting systems into a single platform. He called the result revolutionary for closing a kill chain. The Register reported on his remarks. A Maven operational map of Iran was displayed on screen during Stanley's presentation. Dozens of red icons marked strike locations from Operation Epic Fury, the United States military campaign launched 12 days earlier. One mark was positioned on an area corresponding to Minab in southern Iran, where a missile had struck the Shajareh Tayyebeh Girls' Elementary School on February 28th. More than 160 people were killed. Most of them were children between the ages of 7 and 12. The mark appeared on the same map used to brief reporters on the campaign strikes. Alex Karp, Palantir's chief executive, opened the event with remarks that left little room for ambiguity about his company's role. Once the war starts, we're not interested in debating how we're supporting them, and that sometimes means that people on the other side don't go home, and we are very proud of that. The preceding essay in this series documented the harms race, the dynamic in which AI companies announce model capabilities through the framing of danger, producing not deterrence, but proliferation. This essay follows that dynamic to the domain where its consequences are irreversible. The harms race operates through announcements, but the kill chain operates through ammunition. A kill chain has 6 steps. Identify the target, locate it, filter candidates down to lawful, valid targets, prioritize them, assign them to firing units, fire. This is standard targeting doctrine. Christian Brose laid it out in his 2020 book of the same name. Artificial intelligence now performs 4 of those steps. The 2 that remain under human control are filtering for legality and authorizing the strike. Those are the steps on which moral and legal accountability depends. The question this essay asks is whether those 2 steps can perform their function at the speed the other 4 now operate. The precedent was established before Iran. In Gaza, the Israeli Defense Forces deployed 2 AI systems in the targeting chain. The first, known as the Gospel, automatically reviewed surveillance data and recommended bombing targets to human analysts. Retired IDF Lieutenant General Aviv Kohavi, who led the Israeli Defense Forces until 2023, stated that the Gospel could produce 100 bombing targets per day with real-time recommendations, or up to 73,000 per year. Human analysts, by comparison, have produced approximately 50 targets per year. 50 per year to 100 per day. Once a recommendation was accepted, a second system called Fire Factory cut the time to assemble an attack from hours to minutes, calculating munition loads, prioritizing and assigning targets to aircraft and drones, proposing a schedule. 2 AI systems, 2 points at which accountability could diffuse, with human approval nominally in between. A third system used was Lavender, Developed by Unit 8200 of the Israeli Intelligence Corps, Lavender analyzed surveillance data on nearly the entire population of Gaza, 2.3 million people, and assigned each individual a numerical rating expressing the likelihood of their being a militant. At its peak, approximately 37,000 Palestinian men were listed as suspected targets. In April 2024, the investigative journalist Yuval Abraham published testimony from 6 Israeli intelligence officers with first-hand involvement of Lavender's deployment. The accounts appeared in Plus 972 magazine and were corroborated by The Guardian. They described a system in which the human role in the targeting chain had been compressed to almost a formality. One officer described his function in terms that require no interpretation. I would invest 20 seconds for each suspected militant target at this stage and do dozens of them every day. I had zero added value as a human apart from being a stamp of approval. The sole verification step was confirming the target was male. A known error rate of approximately 10% was accepted. Mistakes were treated statistically. A companion program called Where's Daddy tracked Lavender-identified targets until they returned to their family homes, enabling strikes at night when entire families were present. One officer stated, "The IDF bombed them in homes without hesitation as a first option. It's much easier to bomb a family's home." For junior operatives, the IDF authorized up to 50 or 20 civilian deaths per target. For senior commanders, more than 100 were permitted. Junior targets were struck with unguided 2,000-pound bombs to conserve precision munitions. One officer explained the logic. You don't want to waste expensive bombs on unimportant people. The IDF denied using, in their phrase, an artificial intelligence system that identifies terrorist operatives, describing Lavender as, quote, "simply a database whose purpose is to cross-reference intelligence sources." This reframing is itself significant. When the capabilities were announced, the system was an achievement. When the questions were asked, the system became a database. There was a human in the loop, but the loop had been compressed to 20 seconds, to the point where the human's presence was felt to be ceremonial by the human themselves. The systems deployed in Gaza were the precedent. The system deployed in Iran was a kind of spiritual successor product. Palantir's Maven Smart System traces its operational lineage to the campaign against ISIS between 2014 and 2018, where the company developed targeting software for U.S. Special Operations Forces. By the time the 18th Airborne Corps assumed command of the Security Assistance Group Ukraine in 2022, Palantir had refined its algorithms to process satellite imagery, open-source data, and encrypted communications in support of Ukrainian targeting operations. Anthony King's analysis in the Journal of Global Security Studies documents this phase in detail. The Corps relied on Palantir software to fuse intelligence from multiple classified and unclassified sources, enabling the identification of Russian headquarters and commanders with precision sufficient to wound General Valery Gerasimov in a May 2022 strike. Chad Walquist, a Palantir architect, stated at AIPCON that the number of intelligence officers performing targeting for the U.S. military had dropped from approximately 2,000 to 20. The system generated over 1,000 targets in the first 24 hours of Operation Epic Fury. Anthropic's Claude was integrated into Maven through Palantir's AI platform on Amazon Web Services. According to reporting by the Wall Street Journal, subsequently confirmed by CBS News, The Washington Post, and NBC News, Claude was used for intelligence assessments, target identification, and simulating battle scenarios during the Iran campaign. Claude had reportedly been deployed in the capture of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro in January 2026. The operational timeline is itself a document of the accountability gap at work. On February 26, 2026, Anthropic CEO Dario Amodei published a public statement on the company's conflict with the Pentagon. Amodei outlined two conditions Anthropic would not accept: mass domestic surveillance of Americans and fully autonomous weapons. Both target identification and prioritization, the functions Claude was performing inside Maven, fell outside both lines. The next day, February 27th, President Trump directed federal agencies to stop using Anthropic technology. On March 5th, the Pentagon formally designated Anthropic a, quote, supply chain risk, a classification previously reserved for businesses associated with foreign adversaries. On February 28th, between those two dates, Operation Epic Fury was launched. Claude was running inside Maven when the first strikes hit Iran. The Pentagon determined the system could not be removed during active operations and gave Anthropic a 6-month phase-out period. A company was banned on a Friday, a war began on a Saturday. The banned company's product was processing targeting data for that war and could not be turned off. Federal Judge Rita Lynn blocked the supply chain risk designation on March 26, calling it, quote, Orwellian, and finding that the Pentagon's action constituted First Amendment retaliation for Anthropic's public stance. Claude app download surpassed ChatGPT in the iPhone App Store the day after the Pentagon threatened contract termination. A principled stand and commercially advantageous brand positioning can be the same thing. The harms race, as the preceding essay documented, does not sort these into separate categories. There is a serious case for AI-assisted targeting. It must be stated at full strength before this essay examines where it goes wrong. The case is not primarily about efficiency. It is about operational necessity. In a high-tempo conflict defined by sensor saturation, electronic warfare, and loitering munitions, the decision cycle must close faster than the adversaries, or the firing unit does not survive long enough to act. A system cross-referencing 179 data sources simultaneously, no strike lists, civilian infrastructure databases, geolocation of friendly forces, rules of engagement constraints, confuse information that no unaided human analyst could process in the available time. The relevant comparison is not between AI-mediated review and careful human deliberation. It is between AI-mediated review and the degraded, stressed, time-compressed human decision-making that actually occurs under fire. In that comparison, the proponents of AI-assisted targeting argue the machine does not replace human judgment, it provides a foundation on which human judgment can operate. There is a stronger claim still. A system designed with discrepancy detection could, in principle, flag inconsistencies that human reviewers miss, a change in satellite imagery, or a mismatch between target coding and open-source data, like a school where a military compound used to be. The machine does not get tired, it does not get angry, it does not seek revenge. If strikes will happen regardless, and in a conflict authorized by the commander-in-chief, they will, The relevant question is whether AI-assisted targeting produces fewer civilian casualties than the alternative, and not whether it produces zero. Jack Shanahan, the founding director of Maven, stated the principle plainly after the Minab investigation, saying, I quote, "Finding the right balance between humans and machines will be a crucial component of future training." On April 13, 2026, on Ukraine's Arms Makers Day, the case received its most vivid demonstration. President Volodymyr Zelenskyy announced that Ukrainian forces had captured a Russian-held position using only unmanned platforms, ground robots and drones, without a single soldier crossing the line of departure. The occupiers, he said, surrendered, and the operation was carried out without infantry and without losses on our side. No infantry, no medevac, no casualties on the attacking side. The position changed hands, and no human being on the Ukrainian side was ever in danger. This was not a demonstration. It happened in real time, on the front line with Russia, against real opposition hardened by experience of drone warfare. Zelenskyy reported that robotic systems had completed more than 22,000 frontline missions in 3 months, entering the most dangerous areas instead of soldiers. For a country fighting a grinding war of attrition against a much larger force, every one of those missions represents human lives preserved. Ukraine can absorb the loss of a robot. It cannot afford to lose battle-ready soldiers. The Ukrainian operation demonstrates the potential of unmanned systems to preserve friendly forces' lives. That is a different moral calculus from the civilian harm questions at the center of this essay. Proponents of AI targeting cite it as evidence of the technology's promise. The distinction between preserving soldiers and protecting civilians is precisely where the accountability question sharpens. The technology that can capture a position without risking a single soldier's life is the same category of technology that processed 1,000 targets in 24 hours. The difference between the two outcomes is not the capability. It is what the capability is pointed at, who controls it, and whether the structures governing its use are adequate to the speed of execution. The arguments are real, but what follows does not dismiss them. What it examines is the distance between what AI-assisted targeting could do in principle and what it did in practice when 1,000 targets were processed in 24 hours from a database that had not been updated to reflect the conversion of a military building to a girls' school. On February 28, 2026, the United States launched Operation Epic Fury against Iran. The military struck approximately 1,000 targets in the first 24 hours. The operational details that follow derive from journalistic reporting based on anonymous, official sources. No declassified military records or Pentagon after-action report have yet confirmed them. The Shajareh Tayyebeh Girls' Elementary School in Minab was among the targets struck. Between 156 and 175 people were killed. Most were schoolchildren. This essay does not argue that AI-assisted targeting necessarily produces these failures. It argues that under specific design choices, procurement pressures, and operational tempo of Operation Epic Fury, choices that are not inevitable but are consistent with a broader pattern in current AI military integration, the outcome was foreseeable and was not prevented. In March, Semafor tech editor Reed Albergotti published an investigation into the strike, based on accounts from officials familiar with the subsequent inquiry. The finding was not that an AI system had misidentified the school as a military target. It was that the Defense Intelligence Agency's target coding still labeled the school building as part of the adjacent Sayyid al-Shahada Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps military compound, even though the building had been converted to civilian use. New walls and a separate entrance were visible in satellite imagery. Publicly available information, including Iranian business listings found by Reuters, identified the building as a school. Human reviewers at multiple stages in the 24 to 48 hours before the strike failed to flag the discrepancy. The Semafor investigation identified the proximate failure. The structural question it raises, but does not answer, is whether the error would have been caught under different conditions. The proximate cause was not artificial intelligence. It was outdated data maintained by humans. An outdated coordinate is an outdated coordinate. At 50 targets per year, a school misclassified as a military compound would still be a school misclassified as a military compound. Human-only targeting cells have made identical errors. The 1999 NATO bombing of the Chinese embassy in Belgrade relied on outdated maps. Speed alone does not explain every such failure. What the architecture removed was the institutional time and skepticism that had previously made such discovery routine. The system was evidently not designed for discrepancy detection. No structural safeguard existed to catch an error of this kind. That design choice was foreseeable, and its consequences are not hypothetical. The Semafor investigation does not close the accountability question. If the data were bad, who was responsible for data quality at the rate of 1,000 targets per day? On March 11, 2026, nearly every Senate Democrat signed a letter to Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth raising concerns about AI in targeting and reporting 1,245 killed and more than 12,000 injured as of this date. The following day, 121 House Democrats, led by Representatives Yasemin Ansari, Sarah Jacobs, and Jason Crow, sent a second letter posing 10 detailed questions. Question 3 was direct. Quote, was artificial intelligence, including the use of Maven Smart System, used to identify the Shajareh Tayyebeh school as a target? If so, did a human verify the accuracy of this target? The three-tier culpability framework I proposed in the preceding accountability essay applies here without modification. Negligence. The Defense Intelligence Agency's target coding was outdated. Human reviewers at multiple stages failed to catch it. Recklessness. The throughput, 1,000 targets per day, exceeded the verification capacity by design. That created a structural condition in which errors of this kind were not anomalies, but predictable outcomes. Intentional misconduct would apply if officials knew the site had civilian status or consciously disregarded contrary evidence while authorizing the strike under loosened rules of engagement. The evidence as reported does not establish that third tier for Minab specifically, though the broader policy environment has been characterized by loosened thresholds and dismissed military lawyers. The essay does not need to resolve which tier applies. The framework purpose is to demonstrate that accountability traces to human decisions at every level and never to the system that processes them. The empirical record is consistent with the structural analysis. No controlled experiment exists comparing AI-assisted and human-only targeting on the same target set. The available data do not support the claim that AI integration has reduced civilian casualties. One study published in Frontiers of Public Health found that combatant deaths as a proportion of total fatalities fell from 62.1% in 2008 to 2009 to 12.7% in operations beginning in October 2023, meaning that civilians rose from roughly 38% to approximately 87% of the dead. These figures are contested. The IDF and other organizations publish different numbers. Casualty ratios in urban warfare against an embedded adversary are methodologically difficult to establish. Air Wars documented October 23 alone as producing nearly 4 times more civilian deaths in a single month than any conflict the organization had tracked since 2014. A critical caveat is necessary, and the essay would be dishonest without it. The dramatic increase in civilian casualties coincides with AI adoption. But it also coincides with a permissive policy environment, an administration that had previously pardoned soldiers convicted of war crimes, reports of loosened civilian harm thresholds and dismissed military lawyers, and a command climate in which rules of engagement constraints were relaxed. AI's independent causal effect cannot be isolated from these decisions. AI did not author a policy. It removed the friction that had previously limited the policy's consequences. At 50 targets per year, an outdated coordinate in a targeting database is a tragic error. At 1,000 per day, it is a systemic failure condition. Palantir is named for the seeing stones of J.R.R. Tolkien's Middle-earth. They are devices made for long-distance communication, later corrupted into instruments of surveillance. Alex Karp has led the company as chief executive since 2004. His mother, Leah Janes Karp, is an African-American artist. His father, Robert Karp, is a Jewish clinical pediatrician. Karp grew up in Philadelphia, attending civil rights protests with his parents. He studied philosophy at Haverford College and earned a doctorate in neoclassical social theory from Goethe University, Frankfurt, where he studied under Jürgen Habermas. He described himself as a socialist. He said that if the far right came to power, he would be among its first victims. The trajectory is documented in Michael Steinberger's 2025 book, The Philosopher in the Valley. Steinberger identifies October 7, 2023, as the pivot point. Before it, Karp believed the Democratic Party's position on immigration was an electoral liability. After it, he came to see immigration itself as a threat to American Jews. His public self-description shifted. In a 2024 interview, he described himself as Jewish without referring to his African-American heritage. On March 12, 2026, in a CNBC interview at AIPCON, the same event where the Maven targeting map was displayed, Karp stated, "This technology disrupts humanity's trained, largely democratic voters and makes their economic power less, and increases the economic power of vocationally trained, working-class, often male voters." On the same day, at the same event, Karp opened with the remarks at the opening of this essay. "Once the war starts, we're not interested in debating how we're supporting them, and that sometimes means that people on the other side don't go home, and we are very proud of that." He said on America's military capacity, "What makes America special right now is our lethal capacities, our ability to fight war." Speaking to shareholders 3 weeks later, on February 17th, he said, "We kill people sometimes." Palantir's leadership presents battlefield lethality as both a product achievement and a political project. Karp has described his technology's distributional consequences with a directness unusual among technology executives. The knowledge economy that gave women an edge through higher education is, in Karp's framing, a casualty of the disruption his technology enables. The accountability chain is visible in a single company, from the Minab strike to the 20 operators, to the Maven Smart System, to Palantir, to a chief executive who describes his product as a political instrument, while displaying the operational map on which a school appears as a red mark. The Anthropic paradox completes the picture. Amodei's statement of February 26th drew two narrow red lines: no autonomous weapons and no domestic mass surveillance, and affirmed everything else the Pentagon wanted. The constitutional architecture that governed Claude's deployment permitted target identification and prioritization. It did not permit the autonomous pulling of a trigger. The distinction may matter legally. It did not matter to the children in Minab. Every step in the kill chain involved a human decision and a machine output. The target selection criteria were human. The target labeling was human. The error tolerance, 10% in Lavender, outdated coordinates in the DIA database, was a human policy choice. The rules of engagement were human rules, loosened by human officials. The system transformed these inputs into ranked action options. It did not originate the ends, the legal categories, the thresholds, or the strike authority. The series of essays to which this one belongs calls these systems virtual intelligences, technologies whose outputs appear intelligent, but which possess no agency, no intentionality, and no moral accountability of their own. A reader and a listener need not accept the full theoretical apparatus to accept a narrower conclusion. In the kill chain as documented, every input that shaped the system's output was a human product. Every failure traceable to this case was a human failure. The accountability for what the system produces traces entirely to the humans who design it, deploy it, train it, and approve its outputs. The system contributes processing power to the exchange. It does not contribute intention, judgment, or the capacity for moral responsibility. Accountability concentrates on the human because only the human possesses those things. The kill chain does not alter this principle. It tests whether the institutional architecture surrounding those humans can bear the weight the principle places on them. That step has been compressed to 20 seconds in Gaza. 1,000 targets passed through it in a single day in Iran. In Minab, the architecture clearly could not bear the weight. The kill chain has 6 steps. Artificial intelligence now performs 4 of them. The 2 that remain under human control are the 2 on which legal and moral accountability depends: filtering for legality and authorizing the strike. The human remains in the loop, but the loop has been compressed to the point where the word remains does more work than the human does. On April 13, 2026, President Zelenskyy announced that unmanned systems had captured a Russian position without risking a single Ukrainian life. On the same day, the preceding essay in this series documented the mechanism by which AI companies convert danger into deployment. On a map displayed 12 days after a school was struck, the location appeared as a red icon among dozens of others, indistinguishable from a military compound. The system has no opinion about that. The system has no opinion about anything. And this essay does not argue that artificial intelligence should not be used in warfare. It argues that the accountability structures governing its use have not kept pace with its capabilities, and it's this gap that has already killed many people. The gap is not a design flaw that can be patched. It is the structural condition in which the harms race operates. At the scale of 1,000 targets per day, an accountability architecture built for 50 per year is not adequate. And the last time I checked, the red mark was still on the map. That was Virtual Intelligence in the Kill Chain, part of the Virtual Intelligence series. You can read the full text, with all footnotes and sources, at chorrox.substack.com. The series is free, and if you found this worth your time, I'd appreciate your subscription. The opinions expressed are my own, and do not reflect any official or unofficial institutional position of the University of Pennsylvania. I'm Christopher Horrocks. Thank you for listening.